Last year, more than 200 anime titles were released. That includes new seasons of beloved stories, long-awaited finales of iconic franchises, big theatrical adaptations that toured cinemas around the world, and small hidden gems nobody really expected. So what kind of year was 2025 for anime? What trends stood out? And out of these hundreds of titles, which ones are actually worth your time? I watched every TV series that came out this year, and almost every movie I could find in theaters or on digital to answer those questions, and to share that with you. So buckle up. There's going to be a lot of anime. And let's start, fittingly, with sequels. 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and even 7th seasons. The anime industry has been speeding up over the past few years, so waiting several years for a continuation is no longer the norm. The 2nd season of the historical detective anime set in ancient China, The Apothecary Diaries, came out just a year later. Sequels to action series like Solo Leveling, Dandadan, and Kaiju No. 8 followed just as quickly. And the most important thing is that almost none of them dropped in quality, despite the compressed production schedules. Romance titles have had a slightly rougher time. Preparing the 2nd season of My Dress Up Darling took more than 2 years, but the wait was worth it. The continuation of the cosplay anime looks even more inventive. Cloverworks brought together an especially strong creative team. Episode 5 was directed by Shin Wakabayashi, who previously worked on episodes of Attack on Titan and Aki. Episode 6 was co-directed by Nobuhide Kariya and Keiichiro Saito, both of whom have worked on Frieren, Sunny Boy, and Bocchi the Rock. And there's a lot of interesting craft in the other episodes as well. Lively camera work, the use of chibi models, and absurd, in the best sense of the word, comedic timing. Cloverworks delivered a real masterclass here. The same goes for Studio Bones, which finally wrapped up its superhero anime after 10 years with My Hero Academia. The final season is arguably the most mature and serious the series has ever been. There's plenty of action, but at the same time it carefully draws a line under the show's central themes: responsibility, legacy, and the cost of heroism. Following Hollywood's lead, the anime industry last year discovered the power of remakes and nostalgia. We got a 2nd season of Ranma 1/2, based on Rumiko Takahashi's manga that originally ran back in the 1990s. The action series Yaiba, about a young samurai boy, was also brought back to life. And from the far shelf of foreign children's literature, Anne Shirley was pulled back into the spotlight. The original story is, of course, the novel Anne of Green Gables by Lucy Maud Montgomery, which is especially beloved in Japan. So beloved, in fact, that in 1979, Isao Takahata directed a TV series adaptation of it, with a script by Hayao Miyazaki. Now, decades later, a new remake has been released by the Answer Studio. Reinterpretations of old franchises also fit into this same trend. Last fall, one of the breakout hits was Tanjaburo Tojima Wants to Become a Kamen Rider, an anime about a middle-aged man going through a personal crisis and deciding to become his childhood superhero himself. It's a completely unhinged comedy, and an easy recommendation for anyone who grew up obsessed with Kamen Rider. For those who love Digimon, Toei Animation also delivered a gift in the form of a franchise reboot with the subtitle Bit Break. It's bright, fast, and flashy, clearly designed with a new generation of kids in mind. And it's not just successful TV series that are getting dusted off, but also manga that never received an anime adaptation. If Ubelblatt ended up being very much an acquired taste, then City can safely be called one of the standout anime of this year. It's another Kyoto Animation masterpiece, an adaptation of Keiichi Arawi's city life comedy manga, the same author behind Nichijou. His signature style is all here: rapid-fire pacing, exaggerated emotions, and a whole gallery of eccentric characters. But in City, all of these techniques are taken to a new level. The series features more than 50 characters who constantly shift between leading roles and brief cameos. From schoolgirls who would rather slack off than study, to an unlucky manga artist working for the local newspaper. The characters keep bumping into each other's stories, crossing paths on the streets, and it really starts to feel like you're watching the life of a slightly goofy, slightly weird, but still very real city unfold. And on top of all that, every single drawing for this anime was done by hand on paper. Even the in-between frames were drawn with pen and ink. That approach brings the animation remarkably close to the comic style of the original manga, and the result is genuinely mesmerizing. Unfortunately, not every sequel lived up to the hype. The biggest disappointment of last year was also a sequel, the 3rd season of One Punch Man. It managed to earn the worst episode rating not just of the year, but in the show's entire history on IMDb, sinking to a horrifying 4 out of 10, and at times even dropping as low as 2. Awkward direction, barely any real animation, and accusations of simply tracing manga panels instead of properly animating. The blame here doesn't really lie with the animators, or even with Studio JC staff, but with the production committee. Even though fans had been waiting for the 3rd season for more than 6 years, actual production only began this year. The creators simply didn't have the time to make something worthy, not of the 1st season's level, but even of the already middling 2nd one. As a result, the production was rushed. Animation was outsourced to secondary studios whose job was not to make it good, but to make it on time. And this is the sad outcome. A similar situation played out with the anime adaptation of the John Wick-style shonen series Sakamoto Days. Despite the manga's success, the production committee chose not to wait for the right moment or look for a studio that would be a perfect fit, and instead handed the project to TMS Entertainment. And while the animation quality in Sakamoto Days isn't nearly as bad as in One Punch Man, visually it still falls well short of what the original manga delivers. Still, there's another strong contender for the title of last year's biggest failure, the long-awaited anime adaptation of the isekai series, The Beginning After the End. This is one of the most widely read fantasy isekai stories out there. The web novel has millions of reads, consistently ranks at the top of platforms like Tapas, and has built a massive English-speaking fanbase. The Beginning After the End is usually put alongside titles like Solo Leveling and Mushoku Tensei, but the anime itself can only really be put alongside the 3rd season of One Punch Man. Fans were expecting an adaptation on the level of top-tier isekai, and instead, they got a slideshow. After the season premiered, a petition even appeared demanding a reboot of the series due to the animation quality, and it quickly gathered tens of thousands of signatures. What's most telling, though, is that this sad story of The Beginning After the End is basically the most noticeable thing that happened to isekai this year. There are fewer and fewer transported to another world stories coming out. In the end, the most visible isekai titles of 2025 turned out to be villainous stories. May I ask for one final thing? About Lady Scarlet, who prefers solving problems with her fists, and from bureaucrat to villainous, about a 40-year-old office worker who ends up inside his daughter's favorite game. With isekai stepping back from the spotlight, shonen adaptations have returned last year to fill that vacant space of mainstream popularity. Several strong new titles launched at once, and in very different corners of the genre. On the battle shonen front, we have Gachiakuta, a story set in a world filled with trash and stylish graffiti, drawing clear vibes from both Soul Eater and Dorohedoro. In sports anime, the standout is Medalist. It's a bright example of modern sports manga adaptation, combining the drama and hardships of competitive athletics with warm, thoughtful, deeply passionate characters. It's genuinely impossible not to root for Inori, a 5th-grade girl chasing her dream. And as for shonen comedy, the clear winner this year is Witch Watch. It's basically a full-on sitcom in anime form. A young witch named Nico uses magic for everyday household problems, and it regularly turns into a disaster. One moment, she splits into 4 versions of herself and turns into a child. The next, she becomes flat as a sheet of paper and gets carried off by the wind. The chaos is usually cleaned up by Morihito, who's strong, responsible, and a little boring, in the most endearing way. There's some romance here too, but it's very much in the background. By the way, speaking of romance, the new series by Reiji Miyajima, the author of Rent a Girlfriend, The Shunji Family Children, which you could describe as a fairly classic harem show, with some uncomfortable hints of incest on top, largely flew under the radar. Meanwhile, warmer and more sincere romantic stories ended up getting a ton of positive feedback. The Fragrant Flower Blooms with Dignity scored over 8.5 on my anime list, and Yano's Ordinary Days won people over with its cozy school atmosphere and thoughtful character design. Still, if I'm being honest, this wasn't a particularly generous year for romance anime overall. What really came to the forefront last year were shows that skillfully flirt with the horror genre. First of all, there's The Summer Hikaru Died. It's a psychological horror series that blends monsters and spirits from Japanese folklore with rural isolation, the loss of someone close to you, and the inability to sort out your own feelings. This is easily one of the most inventive shows of the year. Thanks to its sharp direction, every episode finds a new way to scare the viewer and send shivers down your spine. Then there's Kowloon Generic Romance. This series doesn't rely on monsters for its horror, but on science fiction ideas. It's a story about nostalgia, inspired by what was once the most densely populated district on Earth. A story about how the impossibility of returning to the past becomes a trap in the present, locking us inside memories and cutting us off from any real future. Kowloon, which actually existed in Hong Kong in the late 1970s, feels in the anime like a hazy, shifting dream. And the main characters have lost their way in its labyrinths. Also, there's a show that doesn't look like horror at first glance. The main characters are children, Santa Claus is at the center of the story, and the music playfully twists familiar Christmas tunes. But that's only on the surface. In reality, Sanda is Paru Itagaki's reflection on Japan's declining birth rate. What happens if children become the most precious resource in society? Who gets to control them? What will people in power be willing to do? And what kind of terrifying consequences does that lead to? In this Santa Claus anime, there's room for child assassins, biological experiments, and teenage cruelty. And for the finale, I saved the scariest title of the year, Takopi's Original Sin. It's the story of an alien named Takopi who comes to Earth to bring happiness. Instead, he runs into bullying, family trauma, murder, and constant pain. And his magical gadgets turn out to be useless against a brutal reality. The first episode scored 9.7 on IMDb, and on my anime list, the anime climbed to 16th place on the all-time rankings. And it's easy to see why. The incredible background detail, the distinctive visual style, and the smooth animation paired with powerful voice acting, all combined with a gut-wrenching story. This is one of the most harrowing and unflinching portrayals of bullying and of how parents' actions traumatize children. After each episode, you feel like you need to cry it out and wash all of this horror off yourself. And Takopi does all of that in just 6 episodes, which also points to another trend last year. Streaming platforms are opening the door to new formats. The original Takopi manga simply doesn't have enough material for a full television season of 12 or 13 episodes, the standard format set by Japanese broadcast schedules. In the past, that would have meant artificially stretching the story just to fill every broadcast slot. But thanks to digital distribution, and the fact that it brings in enough money for Japanese studios, new release formats are becoming possible. Takopi ended up as a 6-episode series, while Netflix's Moonrise went in the opposite direction. A single season with 18 episodes, landing somewhere in between a typical 12-episode core and a full 24-episode run. But the number of episodes isn't even the most important part. What's really changing is that projects are now possible that simply wouldn't make sense on traditional television. The most interesting release last fall is a perfect example of that. It's an anthology of one-shots by Tatsuki Fujimoto, the author of Chainsaw Man. Each short film in the anthology was produced by a different studio, with a different director, all funded by Amazon Prime. It's a rare chance to trace the evolution of a single talented creator's ideas and craft across 2 hours and 8 short films. The early entries, Two Chickens in the Yard, Sasaki Stops a Bullet, and Love is Blind, feel like playful writing exercises. How do you turn a tongue twister into a story? What if love confessions kept getting interrupted in increasingly absurd ways? And can a teacher be a goddess? But the further you go, the more depth these stories gain, and the more they start to resemble this creator's larger, more mature works. Chances are, in the coming years, we're going to see even more experimentation and new formats, both online and offline. Offline? Cinemas are the ones carrying the torch. While Hollywood blockbusters are struggling with declining interest in superhero movies, anime is quietly taking over the big screens. Last year, huge box office numbers were pulled in by none other than Tatsuki Fujimoto with the Chainsaw Man sequel film, The Reze Arc. Studio Mappa adjusted the character designs and overall art style to better suit Japanese audiences, but that didn't hurt the film at all. The Reze Arc skillfully blends high-energy action with a heartbreaking love story, and once again, Denji ends up being hunted by the girl he falls in love with. A little earlier, but with just as much noise, the first of the final Demon Slayer movies hit theaters, and we still have 2 more films to wait for before the story's true finale. Finally, toward the end of the year, we got 100 Meters, an adaptation of Uto's sports manga, the same author behind Orb, on the movements of the Earth. The film was directed by Kenji Iwaisawa, the creator of the experimental and genuinely wonderful Ongaku Our Sound, about 3 delinquents discovering rock and roll. So, 100 meters ended up in very safe hands, and became yet another visual feast. In Japan itself, even more anime films were released. Studios are repackaging their own TV series into compilation movies and sending them back to theaters, and those re-releases are pulling in impressive box office numbers. That's how we got multiple recap films for Girls Band Cry, as well as re-edited compilation versions of Jujutsu Kaisen. So what kind of year was 2025? Contradictory, exciting, unsettling, surprising, and at times genuinely disturbing. Every year, more and more anime get released, and the gap keeps widening between a handful of truly great works and dozens of series and films that end up mediocre, or outright disappointing, because of terrible management. And it turns out that neither the popularity of the source material, nor the success of previous seasons, nor even the cult status of an author can really protect a project from these kinds of failures. New ways of monetizing anime, streaming platforms, and theatrical releases promise new opportunities. But we can see that not everyone knows how to use those opportunities well. Remakes and reboots have entered the industry. For now, they bring more joy through quality and attention to detail than they signal any kind of creative decline. Let's hope it stays that way. We're watching the trends shift in real time. Isekai and harem shows are becoming less dominant, while horror and thriller titles are gaining ground. Long-running beloved franchises are coming to an end, following their manga, My Hero Academia, Dr. Stone, and Demon Slayer, and in their place, new legends are beginning to form. So yes, it turned out to be a fascinating year for anime. And what more could you really ask for? Well, maybe just that you liked this video. Tell me in the comments which series left the biggest impression on you last year, and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.